that?
Thank y'all, man. Thank you.
Should we just leave now, Marvin?
No, they're excited for all of y'all. Yes, definitely. Really happy to be here with everyone. For those who may not know me, Marvin McClain, I am our Vice President of Program Delivery here at NAVA and supporting our Fed Health portfolio. So really thrilled to be moderating this panel of leaders that we have here today that are shaping how open source is being built, secured, and sustained across public sectors. I think over the past decade, open source has gone from being like a niche developer movement into becoming the backbone of civic technology. So from state health systems to benefit portals and digital identity tools, open source has been enabling governments to collaborate, modernize, and innovate faster while growing transparency and public partnerships. But even with that progress comes new complexities, right? As agencies embrace open source, they're also facing pressures to adopt emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, technologies that promise efficiency and insights, but they also raise important questions around transparency, trust, and accountability. So today we're not just going to be talking about the benefits of open source in government. We talked about that a little bit last year. We're asking, how do we lead with openness in an era of AI and automation? So our goal for this conversation is to connect the strategic with the very practical, to talk about how open source is not only supporting better software, but it also builds stronger public institutions. So to get us started, thrilled to announce our esteemed guests and panelists today. We'll start with Andrew Weiss, Chief Technology Officer of the Regulated Industries at GitHub. Andrew Wheeler, Director of Open Source. David Wheeler, Director of Open Source Supply Chain Security at the Linux Foundation. Alicia Roulat, former Chief Technology Officer at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Isabel Shaw, our Chief Product Officer at Exigy. And David Lipper, Director of George Washington's Open Source Program Office. So thank you all for being here today. As a reminder to the audience, we will have time at the end for questions. And I think we'll go ahead and get started with our first question. And we'll kick it off with Alicia. You've helped shape digital transformation efforts at every level of government from 18F, you've been at HHS, and also USDS. So looking back across those roles, what made open source that approach effective in modernizing government technology and in the delivery?
Yeah, thanks, Marvin, and really happy to be here and see so many familiar faces. I've seen open source be pretty powerful and transformative in a number of different projects along the way. Certainly, one of the things that made open source work the most powerful to me was not necessarily the code and that we were publishing things in the open, but it was really about the culture. Open source really, approached GovTech in a way where we could move out of vendor lock-in. And we did that by building community, practicing transparency and iteration. And so, particularly at 18F and USDS, RIP, we used open source not just like as a moral stance, which I think in some ways the original open source movement sort of was a philosophical one. This was practical, right? Like it was all about reusing proven components. Sometimes it was as simple as opening up a repo and not necessarily sharing code, but sharing information. So using a repo to share like roadmaps and creating accountability in plain sight. So we would often use GitHub as a tool to actually help our partners who were new to working in the open practice it as sort of a mindset shift, and GitHub became a really easy way for us to do that. But we also publish working code in the open, and this really allowed us to lower the barrier to entry for modernization. So some of the best examples I've seen in this is something I did not work on, but I love, which is the United States Web Design Standards. I think is a wonderful example of a standard that started out simple and grew over time into a series of reusable components and design systems that were adopted widely across both federal and state and local governments. And what that meant was we were moving from a place where individual agencies had previously been paying for customized Drupal sites or just doing it over and over the same way every time. And suddenly we had consistency and wide-scale adoption of a very elegant and simple system. Another example that I think about a lot is a project that I led at USDS with NAVA and with CMS. And this was called Income Verification as a Service, which was all about better making it easy to verify income when applying for benefits. So this technology exists and has existed for a long time in the private sector, but it wasn't adopted in the public sector. And part of that was the barrier to entry. And so by open sourcing it, we were able to enable states and civic technology organizations to adopt it faster, more easily, and enabling these governments to focus on different, more important problems that were fundamentally human. So those are just a few examples, but again, I think open source is really powerful when it's focused on culture.
Definitely appreciate that. From your experience, what advice would you give to any of today's states and federal leaders who want to build an open source culture in an environment where budgets are a little bit tighter and priorities are constantly shifting?
Who is that for?
That's a follow-up. But
Okay, sure. So I don't think you need a big budget to work in the open. I think you can start small, publish documentation, contribute back to existing projects instead of launching new ones. I think one of the big value, some of the big value of working in the open is just working in the sunshine, right? Like being open, working in high transparency. And if you're in an organization where priorities are shifting, open source also is resilient, right? Your work doesn't disappear. It's in the open, it is persistent. And so, for example, I still refer back to some of the open repos that we started with many state governments trying to modernize integrated eligibility and enrollment, shout out Randy, that still exist today on the internet, and I use them. And so I think that's the beauty. You don't need a big budget, and they do stand the test of time, which is awesome.
no, thank you for that. Awesome. We'll shift down to David Libbert. You lead the open source program office at GW, and in an academic setting where collaboration and experimentation are part of the culture, how do you measure return in open source when benefits aren't always financial? What kind of metrics or stories have you been able to see and demonstrate that value the openness, whether there's some innovation, student learnings, or just the community impact?
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here. Good question. We are a services organization, our GW OSPO. So though metrics are on my mind, return on investment is on my mind. But as a services organization, we're based in the library. We're here to support all students, faculty, staff. We sort of plant the flag for open source, everything, open access, open scholarship, open education resources, in addition to open research and open science. So kind of a broad spectrum, but we only have 2 people working on our OSPO. We just hired 4 students, so we feel enormous right now and powerful. But we sort of leverage a lot of external and internal open source advocates to make it all work. Our focus is on education and community building, and then helping researchers make all of their work have impact and be publicly available. So how do we measure this? One good measurement is that the Sloan Foundation, who funded our initial grant 2 years ago, awarded a follow-on grant. So we have 2 more years. So we're really excited about that. But they've made it, Slum Foundation has made it very clear. The first grant is start an OSPO, and the second grant is sustain your OSPO. There is no third grant. So we have to figure out how, and this is why this is really on the top of my mind, how do I align with the GW strategic initiatives and framework, and make sure that we can show our value. And I think we're going to be able to do that. We have lots of services that I'm really proud of and initiatives that I'm really proud of. For me personally, collaboration and open source have helped me more than AI has helped me. I think that's a big statement, but it really is true. So, for example, there's a network of academic OSPOs. And academic OSPOs, by the way, are kind of a new thing. Just like government OSPOs are a new thing, I think industry is way ahead of us on this. So, and academic at least has a sort of a different perspective with the education focus and the research focus. But we have about 25 academic OSPOs that are in a group called Curious. It's a network, and we work together in just the most beautiful collaborative way. And so Stanford has this project registry and a student award program. And I said, that looks great. Can I use it? And they said, yes. And then voila, I now did very little effort, and I have a student award program and I have a project registry to highlight projects at GW. UT Austin has a discovery tool to help discover who's doing open source at your university. So we are working with them. And I'm excited because my students have a meeting with their project on Friday, and we're going to try to see if our visualizations that we built from their tool, we can share back. So it's like this whole cycle of, the beautiful open source in progress. We're working with St. Louis University and University of Vermont to have capstone projects and internship programs and different research accelerators. That's really exciting. And the Curious Network has these patterns. So there's dozens of these patterns that are things like, how do you host a conference? Or how do you get a sponsor? Let me see, what are some of the other ones? How do you build open source workshops and tutorials? How do you host maintainer roundtables? So all these things that one university does, and they say, hey, we did this. If anybody wants to see our pattern and learn how to do it, we'll share it with you. And then I just have one sort of anecdotal story about our faculty director, Professor Lorena Barba, went to SciPy this summer, and she's been using Jupyter Notebooks to teach her classes. And she's really frustrated right now because Google Colab autofills all of the coding snippets with AI. And so her students can't not cheat. They're not able to learn the code on their own. So she told this to the Google Colab lead developer and said, can we do something to fix this? Can we just have a setting? And he went back to his team, and in less than 2 weeks, he changed not just Google Colab, but the Jupyter Core open source project so that there's a new metadata field where you can turn off the prompting from the AI and let students actually do the code in the notebook on their own and have them learn, which I think is important right now. So this is a great example of open source, the community getting together at a conference, how these conferences are so valuable, and who knows what can come from it.
That's awesome. That is, we appreciate the partnership and all learning together. So thank you for that. Switching over to Isabel. You've led product strategy on civic platforms that are open by design. How do you balance user-centered design with a collaborative, sometimes messy nature of open source development?
Thank you. And I want to echo everyone else's excitement to be here. It's so lovely to be in a room of open source nerds. And in that true open source spirit, my kind of position, I think, on this panel is someone actively stewarding open source products. So if you are doing the same and you have better answers to any of these questions, please come find me afterwards. I would really love to learn. So I think to kind of the spirit of the question around how do you kind of get out in front of the mess of a lot of stakeholders, how do you orchestrate chaos productively? I think the really kind of short answer to that question is actually use your open source governance. I really appreciate that multiple people here have referenced the bits around open source beyond the code. We heard about culture. We heard about documentation earlier. I think people still overlook governance. Usually it's just like a diagram on a page somewhere. And so if you are able to actually commit to that and put your governance model into active practice, I think that does immense amounts to set expectations. So your stakeholders know where the spaces are, where they're actually going to be able to contribute or have their voices heard. So you're not getting tons of, pings from Slack, or there are conversations happening on the side. I think that that really active, facilitated space is high touch, but it is incredibly worth it. To give maybe just a sort of like a tactical example, because I think that's sort of helpful in these conversations. One of the open source projects we work on has something called a product design committee that meets on a biweekly basis. And it's a space where every government who has adopted the product comes together across jurisdictions. And we actually do a lot of like real product work together. So everything from discovery to definition to feedback on mocks and improvement, depending on the status of the kind of the feature that we're looking at. And again, it takes effort, it takes time, it takes active facilitation, but what we've seen in terms of those questions about kind of human-centered design and what that gets you is that both stakeholders know they have a place to have their voice heard. So they show up, they actively participate. You also are actively teaching your community good product management practices, which goes really far when we talk about how do you actually implement human-centered design. And then I think the last thing I wanted to call out there is just like, we actually have a lot of our end users in the room. And so being able to actually, have both stakeholders and admins of a product participate in your governance is a way to kind of get user-centered design for free. So I think that's a very specific example, but I think like the TLDR for me is like, your governance exists, and so really trying to find ways to make it real and an active part of your project can go a long way.
No, that's awesome. And definitely appreciate you speaking on getting the governance in place, but how they're also contributing. I did have a little bit of a follow-up because you hit on design and product, but how do you kind of keep folks that are non-technical stakeholders, maybe more like the community organizers and even like your policy teams, how do you get them to kind of feel like they're co-owners of the open source tools or part of these processes?
Yeah. That's a question we could probably talk about for a very long time, but I think that
we have a little bit of time. It's okay.
I think maybe just to keep it a little bit tactical. I mean, I think in general, I really appreciate the question because as a product person, if your non-technical stakeholders are not being brought along, product management has failed. And so I think just some of the like very tactical things that we think about pulling into these governance spaces, we think about having in documentation, we think about having in reporting out, is truly, I mean, this seems very obvious, but truly leveraging like visuals and mocks as much as humanly possible. Really trying to find ways to communicate. When you just like speak in requirements, it can really go over people's heads, especially when it's like not everyone's day job to participate in a project. They can't hold that much. They're jumping in between meetings. And so I think arming those with the folks to really understand and have the artifacts to go back to their program teams and show them, not tell them, how the product is meeting that concern they had a couple weeks ago in that last meeting, and setting expectations about what they're gonna see is really, really powerful. One other piece we use, and this maybe not work for all stakeholders, but is we actually like write PRDs, product requirements documents in the open. And so government folks can literally contribute to the goals and objective sections, the like chief, user journeys, critical user journeys. And so really making sure that piece, not necessarily the like, specifications is really clear, helps people feel like they understand enough to poke holes or to express an opinion.
No, definitely appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Andrew, You were with us last year, if I'm
I was,
not mistaken.
yes. Thanks for having me back.
Definitely. GitHub sits at the center of the global open source ecosystem. So from your public sector vantage point, what trends are you seeing among government teams adopting new open workflows?
Man, that's a big question. So I will say, I'm trying to think about what I shared last year and how much has changed in just the last 12 months. It's kind of crazy how quickly things are changing in this industry. What I think is pretty true is that government agencies today across all the public sector are far less risk averse to open source as they used to be. Pretty much it's used in every project. But AI now is fundamentally changing how we use and evaluate open source. So I'm going to put myself in the lens of a consumer of open source, someone who's going to bring this into a system, not necessarily someone who's actually building these things. And so when we look at all the open source projects that are out there, when I'm building a production or critical system, the question that we have to ask now is, do we need this? Do we need this yet another layer of abstraction? Do we need this framework? Because with AI now, we know that it can do that for us. And these are the types of questions that we get from public sector all the time now. And so we have a lot of agencies now that are looking at these software projects, and they look at their backlog and they see that their backlog becomes almost irrelevant now, and they can see immediate cost savings and how they can deliver software in the future. So these are the types of questions that we as a community kind of have to address. And it becomes less and less about the specifics of the project itself, and more about how we can innovate beyond just the source code. How many folks are using AI to write software today? Okay, a handful. So our focus at GitHub, not a sales pitch, but I will say that we're very much focused on how we can kind of reimagine what the SDLC looks like, which translates into the systems development lifecycle for a lot of public sector entities. And it becomes much less to do about the code. How can we use AI to actually plan? How can we build out systems that are to a T built to the specification that we wanted them to be built again in the first place? How often do we start software projects where we have a PRD or we have these architectural requirements and then the implementation comes out and they are completely amiss on the actual design specification? So we see an opportunity here to bring AI to these other facets of the SDLC that historically have been challenging to address and automate. And agencies are seeing that. Organizations are seeing that. They're seeing the value in using AI for continuous integration and deployment and making it more easily, or make it easier for them to adopt some of these principles that, we as a community have adopted for so long. For a lot of us working in the civic technology space, these things aren't necessarily novel. But for a lot of public sector organizations, they're incredibly novel, and they see immediate time savings. They see immediate monetary savings when they can adopt these tools. And then on the note of collaboration, I kind of have a differing opinion here. I think that there are still far too many silos in every organization out there. And as we bring AI in, folks are going to want to feed that technology or that AI more context that they may not necessarily get. So they're almost forced to collaborate with their other teams. And so we see AI as an opportunity to improve collaboration across the spectrum.
Very nice. Definitely appreciate the piece of
Sure.
breaking down those silos. I do have a follow-up question.
Yep.
So you talked about how GitHub is working in these spaces and you see a lot of things across the ecosystem. How are you guys helping agencies measure success, not just in stars or forks, but into the collaboration, reuse, and sustainability?
Yeah, this is a tough question. Everyone's after this. What are the quote unquote metrics that we need to evaluate success? I think MIT did a study actually this summer where they talked about how 95% or 90% of generative AI projects fail. And the reason why is because organizations just give folks the tools and let them run with it. And what are they doing? Well, they're writing a ton more code, they're writing documentation, and they're doing all these things, but at what end? What's the means to the ends here? And so the successful projects are those organizations or agencies that are identifying those domain-specific challenges and using AI specifically to address those challenges. And then that's how you can start to build some of those metrics. So many organizations are caught up in, almost useless metrics, I hate to say it, but like lines of code or, we're closing all these pull requests and we're building all these things, but now we have all this extra bloat that we may not necessarily need, and we think about it from a consumer lens, the people that are actually using these things. It's still a hard problem to solve, and it depends on the persona who's consuming those metrics. Is it an executive who's trying to save money for the business? Is it a product manager who's trying to accelerate their time to value? So it's still a hard problem to solve. And I think as an industry, as an open industry, it would be great to kind of define some of those standards that the industry can adopt.
Awesome. We're looking forward to working with you on that one.
Yeah, likewise.
That's good. David Wheeler. A lot of agencies are grappling with how do you ensure they can trust the software and AI models they're currently using. From your work at the Linux Foundation, what lessons from open source supply chain security can apply to the next generation of AI systems? And also, how can leaders get better visibility into what's under the hood so they can manage these risks without slowing down innovation?
Yeah. So the good news is that AI systems are still software systems, so we can at least take the lessons, what we've learned, and see what applies in this different circumstance. So I'm going to list through a couple, things to think about, approaches we've already used, and then what can you do in AI world. So, you want to talk about provenance and traceability information. Hey, I've heard of this word called SBOM. You may have heard of it. People are they're still working on trying to get those deployed, but they are deployed in many places. For the AI world, we've got model cards, we've got AI bombs, and a lot of the most widely used SBOM formats already have mechanisms for storing AI-related data. Verifying integrity with cryptography. I work specifically for the Linux Foundation, and within that, the Open Source Security Foundation. Our remit is basically we're trying to secure all the open source software. And so one of the things that we did, one of our projects is something called SigStore, which lets people easily sign and verify signatures. Cryptographic signing is old stuff. It's been around for decades. It's often not used because it's too hard. And if you don't use it, it doesn't matter. So SigStore is one of our projects to make it much easier to use. And we have an AI/ML working group which has developed a model signing approach building on that, because there's some quirks involving model signing. The models are big, but we can take advantage of that and build on. Education, best practices. So one of the key things for developing secure software is knowing how to do it. A lot of our software developers don't know how to do it. It's generally not a requirement in schools. So for example, we in OpenSSF, we release a free course on developing secure software. It's LFD 121. If you have any software developers or are one, please go take our course. Costs you nothing. We'll give a little digital badge. It's a good thing. For AI, for the use of AI to develop software, we have just released a new course, Secure AI/ML Driven Software Development, where we talk about how do you use AI tools but with security in mind. So for example, turns out these AI tools can be attacked in the development environment. How do you counter that? It's not that hard once you realize it's a problem. Another issue is how do you make sure that the software being produced? I think it was MIT, it's Veracode. 45% of the times, if it's asked to write some code, it's going to generate the insecure version. Okay, and that has not changed in the last 3 years. They got more functionally better, but no better at security. Why? Because what are they trained on? A whole bunch of insecure code. Okay, that's what it is. And it's very, very hard. I don't see any short-term solutions for this. Maybe in 20 years, but that's not going to improve tomorrow. So that doesn't mean that you can't do anything. It just means there's different approaches. And we have a course on helping people learn how to do that. And of course, tooling and automation for supply chain. For traditional software, we've got best practices badge and baseline, securing our CI/CD pipelines. For AI, we've been pushing the term of MLSecOps. There's going to be a pipeline for generating AI things. Protect that the same way you would with other kinds of software. We even have a white paper specifically about how to do that. Visualizing secure ML ops. It's a practical guide, and basically protect it the same way you would protect the others.
No, definitely appreciate that. You'll have to share that out.
Happy to. I mean, that's publicly available, and I'm sure we can find a way to share links there afterwards.
Awesome. This next question is going to go to all of our panelists. Try to keep it in and around a minute, but if you get super passionate, please take some extra time. If we treat open source as a critical public infrastructure, What should leaders at the federal and state level be doing right now to sustain this long term? And we can start down the list, down the row. Andrew, thoughts?
Yeah, we were actually just kind of talking about this earlier, not this exact question, but a lot of folks are looking, or especially leaders are looking for a bit more predictability. AI right now, and this technology, it's almost like a black box with a lot of unknowns. I equate it to finding a needle in a haystack, except there are multiple needles and you don't know if you found one, if it's the right one. Those are the types of questions that leaders are asking. And so they're also asking, like, is this technology just a wholesale replacement for the things that we do today? Do we need to not do open source anymore? Or do I need to hire entry-level folks and just keep with what I got? And so these are the types of fundamental questions that we know that there aren't necessarily good, strong answers to today. And the answer you give today is just going to change a few months from now. And so it's all about providing guidance to folks. We as a community, I think, can provide better, tangible, and actionable guidance to these leaders to go out and implement. Every day I have conversations with federal leaders and government leaders, and they see the value in the technology and they just want to know how to do it. How do I implement it? How do I reimagine my SDLC? GitHub helped me do it. Community helped me do it. And so I think whatever we can do to better enable folks to go in and adopt these technologies, I think is really going to be key in those types of questions folks are asking.
Do appreciate it. David?
Okay, so yeah, I guess I'm going to split into two answers, or 2 points. The first is that some open source software projects are really well resourced and others are not. Let me focus on that latter set. For the open source software projects that aren't well resourced, what they really need is another cook, not another critic. What they need are folks who are actually willing to stand alongside and work with and help. And so what does that mean? I think what that means is that organizations are probably very, very wise if they step back and say, what are the most critical open source components that I use? We all use it. Okay, there's only 2 organizations, ones that know they're using open source and ones that don't know they're using open source. Okay, those are your options. But some of those open source components are probably very, very important to your circumstance. So identify those. And for those which frankly are under-resourced or not what you need, go show up and give them a hand. Providing a little bit of funding for resources and contributions and so on can make a big difference. We in the LF actually funded Harvard to identify the most important overall. And we have something called Alpha Omega, which actually funds specific projects to go in and give them an assist. But we can't predict what your organization cares about. We can make some general estimates. A second point would be sharing vulnerability reports and helping them, ideally helping them fix them, or at least making it very clear. We seriously have a problem right now that contractors will sometimes develop internally a fix and for a project. And within the same contractor, a different project, don't worry, they will redevelop the same fix. And then a different contractor for the same government organization will redevelop the same fix. And don't worry, every single one of those hundreds of times will be charged for again to the US government. Okay? This is insane. Okay, the US DoD actually has released a policy back in 2022 said, please stop. We don't want to see that anymore. Release those upstream. And we also, and this is a general issue with the vulnerabilities equities process. It's not transparent. I have no idea how many vulnerabilities are not being released, but I bet it's non-zero. And and every one of those that is being withheld is a vulnerability that the US is choosing to sustain. That's a mistake in many cases, I think. So at the very least, sharing those stats and frankly, re-review those. If there's a vulnerability, it's probably high time to go fix that. So anyway, those are my 2 points.
Alicia?
Well said. So kind of thinking about this from the perspective of like a federal or a state and local organization, my brain goes in 2 directions. One is stewardship, and then the other is capacity. So the digital maturity of the organization trying to do this. So on the stewardship front, if we're going to be thinking of this as public infrastructure and an investment, it needs to be a long-term investment. And as a former urban planner, where my brain goes is this is almost like thinking about building a park in a community, right? Like we are going to sink a lot of investment into establishing this piece of technology. And the only way that it will succeed over time is if we have stewards, right? And people to really maintain this park. And, you know, if we don't have stewards and we don't have folks who maintain the park, it goes into disarray, and there is a big graveyard of open source projects. And so I think for this to succeed as a public infrastructure investment, we really need to build in thinking about that group of stewards and maintainers from day one. Another thing is to think about lower capacity organizations. So I have seen, I don't know if any of you folks were around for like the open data movement, but one great example I think is this platform called CCAN. So this was like an open source free tool that could host all your open data, similar to Socrata's original platform. And it was free and it was open source. And we were all like, great, this is going to be amazing. Let's adopt it. I was working with a pretty low capacity organization at the time, had a handful of enthusiastic programmers who wanted to adopt and implement this. Unfortunately, what happened is they left. And with that went their skill set, their talent. The code was no longer being updated. The security vulnerabilities went through the roof, and eventually it stopped working. And so I think both stewardship as well as understanding what the existing capacity is of the organizations trying to adopt these technologies is really important as a fundamental ground layer before, you know, continuing.
No, thank you. Isabel?
Yeah. I like your answer about stewardship so much. I almost don't want to answer at all, but I think I'll piggyback on here where I think Sam shared with us earlier some really great facets of kind of infrastructure. And I really liked the point around sustainability, building off of what you just shared. I'm going to put out the well-trodden metaphor we all know, which is that open source is free like a puppy. That's a good one. Yeah. And so I think like one of my asks, because I'm not going to tell anyone how to do this, but one of my asks is that we have a more robust conversation about the fact that no technology is free, even open source technology. It's just not a thing. If it's free to you, something else they're getting from it, right? It takes people, it takes stewarding organizations to build and support these things long term to make sure they're sustainable. And so I think maybe the ask, the wonder, I think the call to action is maybe just, more robust conversation around the cost modeling for open source products and projects to be able to account for that, the fact that does need to be sustainability planning, which is resource planning, but also a more robust understanding on the other side of the very real kind of compounding cost savings and all the other benefits you're getting that protect you from really bad positions down the line, like ownership and transparency and all these things we all know cost so much money eventually. So I think that's kind of my ask and wonder is kind of that like new cost model and kind of having better shared framework for that. And if we're going to get really greedy, that aligning with procurement, but I think that's a different can of worms. So
yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. But to close us out, David Lippert.
I'm going to try to be brief. It's not going to happen. We'll try. So I'd like talking to government people in the room. I have a list. I want you to be aware of the Bipartisan Source Code Harmonization and Reuse in Information Technology Share It Act. So that's something we can leverage to push open source. Follow the United Nations, Germany, France, India, who are all in on open source right now, and learn from them. Follow some of the things that they're doing. Follow the CMS, OSPO, as a leader right now in other government agencies should try to model and leverage the work that they've done. They're great collaborators. They'll share with you. I'd love to see incentivizing all code created or some code, just incentivizing code that makes sense to be shared. creating by government contractors to be open source, incentivize collaboration between industry and academia so that we can do research, so we can help our workforce get trained in how to do open source and how to do software development. Follow the NIST AI risk management framework as you're building AI systems to help make them trustworthy. And then this is a pet peeve of mine. Understand that open weight AI is not open source. Please look at the OSI AI definition for what I think is a good open source AI definition and try to follow that. I think having government promote real open source AI is something that we can all start to share and benefit from, as opposed to a few companies controlling it.
Nice. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for your responses. That was really good. So, coming back to you, Isabel. We're seeing rapid experimentation with open source AI models. So, what are some of the biggest opportunities for that civic impact that folks are looking for?
Yeah. I think the opportunity that's front of mind right now, a whole world of opportunity when we think about the models itself, is how do we more effectively crowdsource and share models specifically around benefits access? I think so many people in this room, so many people across the space, and I think we heard some amazing examples earlier, are really trying to solve a very similar set of overlapping problems. So excited to hear about the developments that were just shared today, because I think what we all know is that it's a very similar set of underlying data, it's a very similar set of programs, therefore a very similar set of user journeys. And so I think the opportunity that I'm really excited about is not just, is really more about the underlying data and the quality that we can, the speed to get it to quality and the trust that we can build if a bunch of organizations came together and proofed those underlying models together. The types of controls that would be in place from kind of that collective learning and the improvement the model could have over time. And so I think just to be very specific about that, I think I saw a nod to this earlier, but I mean, how many organizations who are working on access to benefits have talked about kind of like a AI-assisted document tool, right? Whether you're ensuring the right thing gets uploaded to start or you're helping people who are processing applications verify that information. There's a bunch of tools and models out there, who have been built for that. But what would it look like if we were all kind of contributing back to the underlying models that are getting better and smarter? Because the set of that information, I think we all would really benefit for and how quickly we could actually develop features that could be trusted by government and by users. So again, I think the basic for me is the crowdsourced model and kind of where that lives and how it gets stewarded.
Definitely. No, that's good. Definitely want to get to this procurement conversation. So we're going to move forward. We'll start with you, Alicia, on this one. Open source is often touted as cost effective, but procurement systems aren't always designed to value that shared ownership. So how can leaders modernize procurement to recognize open source as a strategic investment and not a line item expense?
Yeah, I think this is an important one. So most of the conversations I have about open source, in government are really why not to do open source. And I think getting ahead of that in the procurement, legal, and security layers is really important. And this often happens in the procurement process itself. So as government organizations think about what to buy, the rules of the road go into that RFP, RFQ, whatever the procurement vehicle is. And so I think anticipating reasons to say no by potentially creating reusable, compliant language. So I really liked what you were saying about just addressing security head on so that it's not part of the conversation. And then equipping these government organizations that don't understand the technical details of security concerns by giving them reusable language that they could actually embed into an RFP or procurement process. Because I think during that early procurement cycle is when things may, that's where we get the no's. I also think our articulating how we're going to buy this as a strategic investment. Like technology, like any technology, this is not like buying a building or buying a car or buying a bridge, right? It's not like a one-time capital investment. Ironically, all of those probably also have maintenance and stewardship, but the way that you buy it, government traditionally has bought technology as a capital investment, not as an ongoing maintainable and evolving body of work. And I think we need to shift toward outcomes-based procurement and away from deliverables-based to really fundamentally help us do that.
Amen.
Well said. Well said. Andrew, did you want to add anything to that?
Oh, you tagged me on this question? I just wait for the PO to come in. No, I'm joking. Look, we all know procurement's hard, and it's long overdue for modernizing how long procurement takes, especially when we think about the people that we're delivering these services for, right? It shouldn't take 9 months for someone who needs a critical service to start using it, or wait for something as simple as getting their licenses spun up. So I think obviously it's clear that a lot of these new technologies, especially AI, can be used to modernize these systems. On the other side of things, though, as someone who is involved with a lot of these RFP processes, I think those that are in the space of procurement and actually defining these RFPs should put, I know it might be controversial, but put AI more front and center, because it's safe to assume that all of these vendors and technology developers out there are going to use AI in some form or fashion. So these RFPs should very much include AI front and center in terms of how they expect their organization to use it, how should you be using it, how is it going to be used in the product they're procuring or the open source community they're procuring, because that's very much top of mind for folks today. So that's about the only thing I'd add.
No, do appreciate it. I do want to open it up. I think that, this is kind of like a hot topic. So did you want to jump in there a little bit?
Yeah, I was going to. Hello? Oh, there we go. Yeah, so I wanted to actually briefly jump in on both. As far as the procurement and so on, I used to be far more involved in the U.S. government than I am now, and I was mostly involved in the Department of Defense. But at least my experience, which is shaded, was part of the challenges was that you have a relatively small number of contracting officers who are trying to respond to a very, very. If you printed out the FAR, I mean, it's taller than me, and then you print out the DFARs, it's another thing that's taller than me, and so they're personally held liable if they screw up. So a contracting officer has no incentive to do anything except what didn't get them in jail last time. And I'm actually sympathetic to their view, but the problem here is they're strongly incentivized to not do anything to fix past problems because that kept them out of the jail. And that was really the only thing that mattered. And so we need to find a way to show that, no, these other folks did it and they didn't go to jail. You'll be okay. And proof points of past folks, I think, will help a lot. Really wanted to come back quickly to the question about AI and weights and so on. I think it hasn't really been emphasized so much here, but I think it's important. Open data, open science, open standards. If we're going to have training of AI systems, it needs to be legal to get the data to train on. We have currently a situation. Oh, thank you. Okay. So one more time. We currently have a situation, it's getting better, particularly in health, thank you very much, where it's still legal for governments to spend billions of dollars on research and immediately captivated by certain companies who somehow got the copyright for the works that somebody else paid to do all the work for. And that means that if you search on the web, you can find the quacks, but not the actual research. That's shameful. Now, it's fine if you're a company and you're personally, with your own money, paying for the research, but that's not the case for most of the research that's going on today. We need to make it so that by default, it's open. If there is a special case where you can make the case, for example, that it's all paid for by private funds, sure. All the research by private funds, that's a different matter. Public funds? No, that goes to the public. And shame on you for saying it should be anything else. And although that won't solve all problems, making this better data more available to AI systems and easier to train on will help everybody. Anyway, thanks. Wow.
No, we are all for sharing of data because that's where it all starts, right? Very nice. I'm going to jump down to like our last question for our panelists, and then we'll get into some questions from the audience. So this is kind of like the hot take moment for you all. In one sentence, what's your vision for open source and civic tech in 10 years from now? And what must happen in the next 2 years to be able to get there? And I'll start at the other end with David Lipper.
All right, in 2 sentences. Open source AI and AI are both fairly old. They're over 30 years old. AI is having a big heyday right now, and I'm hoping that open source will have its heyday. Over the next 2 years, let's build relationships. Let's fund promising open source projects and organizations, and let's deliver solutions to prove open source and collaboration can solve the important problems of our day.
Nice. Thank you. Isabel?
Okay. Multiple sentences. I think the big hope I have that we heard a bit about already today is that the open source movement, successful open source projects, open source champions set a new standard of what it means to be an ethical vendor. And that by kind of proving that these things are actually possible and provide better outcomes by building transparently, ensuring you can get your own data out of your systems, et cetera, it sets a new standard across the entire industry about what is acceptable to purchase with American dollars.
Awesome. I think in 10 years from now, I want our park to be thriving and beautiful. We have a mature, healthy ecosystem. Our open source graveyard of projects is small. We know where to use open source and maybe where not to, and that we have stewards, so even that low maturity organizations can adopt and maintain their code.
David?
Okay, briefly. So I'd like to see governments release much more open source software. I'd like to see them invest more in the open source software that they and their citizens depend on. And which ones? Well, you can do some analysis to figure out what are you using? What's the critical ones? And as far as how to get there, I think everybody in this room is actually a part of that answer. But I think part of it is open source software released by default for real. The more that you have it released and used, you start to get that collaborative flywheel going. How do you collaborate? Showing up and collaborating. And the more you release, the more you work with others, the more incentive there is to do the same. So I think the challenge is, you got a big, heavy wheel. It's heavy. Once you get going, it's going to be great, but it is a little work to overcome the friction and get moving.
Definitely. We have to show up and collaborate. Like you do have to show up and be present. So, Andrew, to close us out.
Yeah, I think it's all about empowerment. I think the opportunity now to enable the next generation of civic technologists is insane. The barrier to entry is so much lower now, especially with open source communities and how much more or how mature they are. And now with AI, I'm a music producer on the side. Check me out on Spotify. And it's super controversial right now in the industry to use AI to make music. But why not? Why not use AI to make music and inspire the next generation of musicians or technologists? Because again, it's prevalent. Everyone's going to start using it no matter what field they're in. And I think it's on us to enable some of these folks, guide them in the right direction, and ultimately empower them.
Thank you, everybody, for joining our panel today. That was really good. That was really good. A lot of nuggets there. Okay, I was looking for you, Charlotte. I think we are going to take a couple questions from the audience, and we have a microphone over here.
Thank you, panelists. That was lovely. So Alicia mentioned how the open source movement started out as kind of philosophical, and we've moved in the GovTech space into a more practical place. And so my question's really focused on practical things here. So vendors who contract with agencies to provide maintenance and enhancements may want to lock themselves in or make themselves more relevant by extending open source software with their own proprietary modules and code, because open source is free like a puppy and all that. And my question is, how can we build resilience into our open source practice, strategies that we can use to prevent that kind of thing from happening?
I'll take a stab at answering this. I think I want to focus on the word that you said about proprietary. I think for me that one sticks out greatly. Even if you have an entrenched incumbent vendor executing work, there's a world where that can work and be fine. I think when we get into situations where we're creating proprietary code and proprietary systems where organizations are like buying a car with the hood welded shut where you have to pay to change it, that's where we get into trouble. The answer, I think, is in standards. It's really articulating and designing policy and governance so that we don't write contracts that put us in that position, and we have the ability to say, this is what the standard is and what we expect you to meet. So from my perspective, that's it.
If I can jump in addition. Yeah, I mean, standard's good. I think at some point, though, it's going to be hard to have a one-size-fit-all. So I think, frankly, what's really important is education of the, I was just going to say procurement officers, but really it's the entire procurement team. Unfortunately, we've got a lot of folks in procurement who are very much only focused on what did it charge me this year, not what will it cost the government over the next 30 years. Now, if the U.S. government goes away next year completely and never returns, it's okay to cost it out for only 1 year. I'm actually not expecting that case, okay? How long are you going to have health care? Oh, you're going to have people who need medicine. I guess you probably should think longer term than this year. And we've got a lot of procurement. That's the only thing that matters is the number this year. Stop. What is it long term? And a lot of the reasons that people, yes, there are cases where you should be using the closed source software, but in a lot of cases, the arguments fall apart once you look beyond the 1 year horizon. Mm-hmm. So you're supposed to actually already look beyond the 1 year horizon. Part of the solution, I think, is education. Frankly, we need the procurement folks to actually understand the implications of their decisions and think, how will that affect the public long term?
I'll say it real quick. I sort of like the answer I heard, I think, from Nava earlier, which is they're not worried about their competitors. And so they're just going to make it open source and have a permissive license. And I like that. And then other people can try to, do what they're going to do to make their money. And hopefully the open source will win out and people will be educated and make choices against the vendor lock-in.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, I just have to pitch the 18F de-risking guide. I think it's still on 18f.org, where they include a sample QASP, which is a quality assurance surveillance plan, where you can put technical requirements into the contract, and I put open source into the contract, and so you don't even really need your procurement officers if you tell them it's a technical requirement. So come talk to me about that if you want to talk more.
Hi there. Private citizen here. My question is, we've heard in places like the UN Open Source OSPOS for Good Summit and a few other places about the graying of open source. And then we also have, the maintainer base is getting grayer, and there are less people to fill that gap. And with AI being adopted, which has a ton of promise, we are also seeing a trend where junior developers are actually being deprioritized for using AI to replace these things. So, and also we have the retirement cliff that's coming in public service as well. So all three of these different forces are coming to bear upon the open source movement. So I would ask the panel, how are we as a community going to address bringing that next generation of open source maintainers forward? Because as it's been said here, stewardship and maintainership are what actually makes open source into the future. So how can we all contribute to the future with that next generation? Thank you.
I'll start the serve. I think there's several different issues. I've also heard about the deprioritization of junior developers, although there's actually seems to be some complicating factors. When we did a survey, we actually found there were other folks were bringing in more that were compensating for that effect. And I think there's some peculiarities here that there's an economic rule for this, and my brain is unable to think of it. I'll remember it later. Basically, if you make something less expensive, you'll tend to buy more of it. And I've forgotten
Economy of scale.
No, it's not economy of scale. It's something different. But I'm sorry. Induced demand. Okay, that wasn't the phrase, but that is also valid. So it wasn't what I was thinking of, but that's right. So the basic idea, though, is that AI, what Stanford found was that when they did a survey of about 100,000 developers, so this is not a small study, once you compensated for all the rework you needed to do for the AI, you were getting up to around 20% productivity improvement. That is astounding. Okay, we're talking, the level of switching to high-level languages, structured programming, that kind of level of productivity. This is a big deal. It's why most software developers today use AI. It's not a future thing. That's the norm. Doing it entirely manually is the weird thing. It's like the manual clutch. I need an extra adjective to describe the weird people who don't use AI now. Okay? But what that has meant is that it's now costing less to develop software, and so people are asking for more of it because they can afford more. Now, coming to the junior developers, turns out that although the AI is more effective for the experts, it's still helpful for the junior. It's not as great, but what you can't do is just let the AI do it all. You can let it do that. You'll be very sorry about the results. And so while I think right now we've got a number of companies who are letting their juniors go, other folks are picking them up. And so I actually have some hope. Maybe misplaced. The bigger problem, I think, is going to be a whole lot of people are saying, oh man, the AI will replace me. I won't go into computer science and so on. That's the bigger concern I have, because the folks who are already through the pipeline, they're already here, some adjustments, but a sudden drop in the pipeline, which is something I can easily believe because people make choices based on future expectations, that's a worry. As far as the graying of open source, depends on the projects. Some of the older projects, yes. The newer ones, not so much. So I think it's complicated is the quick answer. How do we deal with this? I think we need to right now message that, hey, AI is an assistant. I can't tell you about the future, but at least right now, it is not replacing the people. It is aiding the people. You cannot replace the people with the AI, at least with current technology. And I'm frankly not very hopeful next 5 years that's going to be replacing people level for at least software development.
Yeah. I'll tackle part of your question. I think the idea that we're reaching a silver tsunami of retirements in public service. I did not make that up. It's happening, right? People are more than ever reaching retirement age. I think in addition to that phenomenon, we also have a moment where we have lots and lots of legacy systems written in legacy code, mainframe, COBOL, .NET, as well as legacy operations. And so as we start to see folks retire out of public service, with some of them goes that skill set. And so here's a place where I actually think AI can help, because we have an opportunity to use AI to have better observability into aging code bases to then be able to get off of these legacy systems in a safer, faster way. So I think in that scenario, it's actually a great pairing of two forces.
I'll talk to the education side of things. I am very nervous. The students are very nervous about getting jobs. Also, we've done surveys on what is open source, and the results are not great. A lot of people think because they use ChatGPT and it's built by OpenAI, they are using open source, and that crushes me every time I hear that. But I am really hopeful that industry and government can partner with academia and do. Students want their work to be meaningful. There's so many problems to solve in the world right now. So I'm really excited, and we've already started some prototypes. We're building capstones and intern programs where people can use open source. They can collaborate internationally and really make a difference, and the students love it. So if we can make more of that happen, I think that's a great path forward.
Can I make a quick reply to something that Alicia said? Because I think you mentioned COBOL in specific. Turns out that current AI systems are terrible at COBOL. They're terrible at understanding it. They're terrible at generating it. Why? It's not because they can't handle more natural language-like programming languages. They actually handle other ones that are more obscure much better. The problem is that there's almost no training data. Have you heard that topic before? Training data is king in the machine language world. There's almost nothing that the people can train, that folks can train on for COBOL. We in the Linux Foundation, we actually have another foundation that's a sister to mine, the Open Mainframe Foundation. They're actually actively working trying to collect COBOL programs to publish as open source, even if they're not being currently used, so that they can be trained on. And if you want to be able to maintain COBOL programs or translate them longer term, we need to find a way to do that. I think more broadly, thinking about training sets, how can we get these training sets out, is vital to this new world.
Thank you. That'll conclude our programming for today, but definitely appreciate that. And thank you for this panel for all of the insights and inputs. This has been exciting. So us coming here together as an open source community, hopefully you all have seen the growth from last year into this year. Our partnerships with academia, our partnership with industry partners, as we grow in Oscar and Strata, and even on our projects that we are supporting at the federal and state level. We're just going to continue to build on that collaboration, the stewardship that you mentioned, but also tying in that education piece, which has been really big for us, the partners with GW in Georgetown going forward. So we are really excited about this. But definitely a round of applause for our excellent panel today.